De Montfort tells us that true devotion to Mary, there are many that will be devout exteriorly. There are a lot of false devotions or a lot of mediocre devotions. Some small number will enter into its inward spirit, mounting one step. But what of the second, third, and last, that of a habitual devout state? He leaves it as a question and a challenge to us. So what is this inward spirit of true devotion? What is it that we'd be entering into, and hopefully habitually? The characteristic of true devotion is that it ought to be interior, coming from the mind and the heart, not simply external, hypocritical, or interested, or presumptuous, but true and pure. We should do all our actions, this is by Mary, with Mary, in Mary, and for Mary, so that we may do them all more perfectly by Jesus, with Jesus, in Jesus, and for Jesus. This is St. Louis de Montfort's way of demarcating interior practice of true devotion. So let's look at them each in tandem. All by Mary. All by Mary. We should obey her in all things, conducting ourselves by her Spirit. It must first of all, that is, the soul, one must first of all renounce its own spirit and its own lights and wills before it does anything. We must lose ourselves and abandon ourselves to her, like a stone one throws into the sea. This can be done simply and in an instant, by one glance of the mind, by one little movement of the will, or even verbally in saying, for example, I renounce myself, I give myself to thee, my dear mother. So this before I'm doing something, before I take on a task, I'm all yours. Just a simple glance to heaven, a simple surge of the heart, by which we do this thing by Mary. I think of St. John Paul II's papal motto, Totus Tuus, this I'm all yours, from the shorter consecration of St. Louis de Montfort. This would be a good way of going about it. A characteristic of this devotion fits well here, that it's tender. It is full of the confidence of a child. In a word, in all the evils of body and mind, the soul ordinarily has recourse to Mary without fear of annoying her or displeasing Jesus Christ. We must from time to time, both during and after an action, renew the same act of offering and of union. And so in this, we also get another characteristic of constant. It becomes more constant. We are confirmed in good, not easily abandoned spiritual exercises. This true devotion makes courageous in opposing the world and its fashions and maxims, the flesh and its weariness and passions, the devil and its temptations, so that a person truly devout to our Blessed Lady is neither changeable, irritable, scrupulous, nor timid. When he loses the taste and relish of devotion, he does not become disturbed because of that, for the just and faithful client of Mary lives by the faith of Jesus and Mary, and not by natural sentiment. So if we're doing all things by Mary, we ought to see that we've become more and more constant and more tender in our devotion. All with Mary. That we do all with Mary. We ought to follow her example, especially meditating on her virtues, like faith, humility, and purity. In fact, those are 3, but St. Louis de Montfort gives 10 principal virtues of Mary. Profound humility. Let me linger on that for a moment. By the light which the Holy Spirit will give you through his dear spouse, Mary, you will understand your own evil, your corruption, and your incapacity for anything good. Mary will communicate a portion of her profound humility by which we despise none but ourselves and love to be despised. This loving to be despised is kind of a radical way of talking about a degree of humility by which we recognize that we're sinners and we wish that others would too. She had a hidden life due to her humility. She wanted to be hidden, prayed for it, and received it. Hidden were her conception, birth, life, mysteries, resurrection, assumption, having no public miracles during her life, but much is said by her, not much is said by her or of her in the Gospels. So we see Mary kind of hidden, right? Now, what grand and hidden things that mighty God has wrought in this admirable creature. Jesus took pleasure in humbling and concealing her during her life in order to favor her humility, calling her by the name woman, as if she were a stranger, although in his heart he esteemed and loved her above all angels and all men. So God took pleasure in this humility because he knew he'd be able to exalt her. God wishes now to unveil Mary in the end times because it befits her humility, that she be exalted. As a recompense for her profound humility, God has empowered her and commissioned her to fill with saints the empty thrones from which the apostate angels fell by pride. So the choirs of angels, it's traditional to think in terms of those who were lost, that third that fell from heaven and became demons and devils. Those are going to be filled now with the saints. That the saints' place in heaven is actually going to be among the choirs of angels. Not that we become angels, but that those choirs are going to be filled with angels and saints, and that it's to Mary to fill those because of her humility. The most terrible of all enemies which God has set up against the devil is his holy mother Mary. Satan, being proud, suffers infinitely more from being beaten and punished by a little and humble handmaid of God, and her humility humbles him more than the divine power. Pretty cool stuff about Mary's humility that we should reflect and mimic. A lively faith is another one of those virtues that we have a good quote on. The more then that you gain the favor of that august princess and faithful virgin, the more will you act by pure faith. A pure faith which will make you care hardly at all about sensible consolations and extraordinary favors. A lively faith animated by charity, which will enable you to perform all your actions from the motive of pure love. The other virtues that he lists: blind obedience, continual prayer, universal mortification, divine purity, ardent charity, heroic patience, angelic sweetness, and divine wisdom. All of these we meditate on and mimic as we do all things with Mary. Now, all things in Mary. St. Louis writes beautifully here about Mary as the true Eden, the paradise, the Edenic paradise. He says, the ancient paradise was but a figure of her. He also speaks of other types, like the temple, or you think about the Ark of the Covenant. How do we gain entrance? One cannot enter into this except by a particular grace of the Holy Spirit, her spouse, which they must merit. Therein, one is nourished by grace and maternal mercy, delivered from troubles, fears, and scruples, safe against one's enemies, and is formed in Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ in it. I won't go too much further than that, but this entry into the Marian paradise, the paradise of being within Mary's maternal care, is a place that's safe and protected, and profound, and a place wherein Christ is formed in us. Last one, all for Mary. As approximate end, Mary's approximate end, but the remote end is, the final end is Jesus, that she's going to bring us to Jesus. So that's a very important preliminary note. So we're doing all things for God, for his greater glory, for Jesus. But another way of doing all things for her, because she's the approximate means by which we get to him. So this is a call. St. Louis de Monfort gives us a call to magnanimity. If we're going to do all things for Mary, we should do the best that we possibly can. He says, supported by her protection, we must undertake and achieve great things for this august sovereign. So in other words, even though you might do very small things in a hidden and humble way, you should also do magnificent things, magnanimous things, because why not? Be bold. So this combination of a humility that keeps us small, but a boldness that makes us big, lives together in these saints that she forms. So one characteristic we find really coming out here is that this devotion is to be disinterested, not out of self-interest, but because she deserves to be served and God in her. It is on this account that he loves and serves her as faithfully in his disgusts and dryness as in his sweetness and sensible favors. So think here of Therese Lisieux, who found it difficult to pray a rosary, nonetheless loved Our Lady, would still pray the rosary, right? She should still do it, because even amidst things that aren't consoling, even things that cost greatly and are difficult, that devotion is true, and it's tested, and it's disinterested. We must defend her privileges when they are disputed. We must stand up for her glory when it is attacked. We must draw all the world, if we can, to her service. And to this true and solid devotion, we must speak and cry out against those who abuse her devotion to outrage her Son, and we must at the same time establish her veritable devotion. We must pretend to no recompense for our little services except the honor of belonging to so sweet a queen, and the happiness of being united through her to Jesus her Son by an indissoluble tie in time and eternity. And so with that, we'll say that true devotion interiorly is that we will be devoted to Mary, that all that we will do will be by her, with her, in her, and for her, that it would be all the same for Christ. So I hope this was a good meditation and a good answer to how to not be a false devotee. The practical takeaway is that we give ourselves and renew this regularly before we do anything, that we become tender in this devotion, and that we find her benefits and we mimic her humility and her grace, that especially those virtues, purity, faith, humility, or any of the other 7 that were listed. So if you haven't ever read True Devotion, this is one of those really cool arenas, and I think that has a lot of bang for the buck. So next time, I'll talk a little bit about the external devotions. So this internal stuff doesn't just stay internal. It needs to be manifest bodily, and the external exercises and practices are what we're doing. We're praying these vocal prayers. We're getting ready to do a consecration. We're getting ready to wear a scapular or a chain, or we're praying a rosary, getting it blessed. We're going to do these external things. So let's just take a little bit and look at what those are.